Hello, Western Civ 105. Welcome to week 6. This is the last week until finals. We're almost done. And I realized that this last week was a serious challenge. And I'm hoping that you'll find this week challenging, but you'll see you don't have to work as hard. You just have a lot to watch and to take in. So there's a few things that I want to explain. So before I go into the information go over content. Keep in mind, and I can't remember if I told this to you guys or just 107. As you're looking at your grades, you'll notice that when you look on the grades section in Canvas, it'll show assignments that I did not assign. Don't worry about those. For some reason, when I get a new semester coming, and what I do is I move over the content from one semester to the next, and sometimes I'll alter my assignments and I'll get rid of some. So we had a cram course and I moved things around, and I changed some assignments, and for some reason Canvas keeps everything that I ever have, and the modules I can do what I want. But ultimately, the bottom line is you don't need to worry about what's on the grade section. As long as you've been doing all the assignments that were in each week's module, you are fine. So then you just look at your grade and you just see the percentage of where you're at. Okay? And the syllabus shows you it's the basic arrangement for what would be an A, B, C, D, or F. Okay? And so just to make that clear, so in terms of grades. Now, this also means this. What I want to remind you, and I'm going to say this one more time next week, I give a lot of assignments with a lot of points, and if you've noticed, you can lose a lot of points and still get a good grade in my class. So sometimes I want some of you to take a deep breath and relax and know that you are definitely very solid and where you're at. On the assignment linking World War II, the Cold War, and the War on Terror, I'm just getting to grading these. I'll be honest, many of you told me this is a very hard assignment. And I understand. And I'm going to be grading, my papers grade you reflecting on the content directly related into each module. And normally you get a little bit more of a chance to chew on the content and not have to be overwhelmed in the way that you were. What I just want to make really clear, and you are maybe equally baffled by how much I wanted you all to understand that Hitler was not a leftist socialist. And my agenda on this was simply to clean up bad history that's going around. As I mentioned in my one announcement that many of you didn't watch, is that Stalin was a leftist. The left and the right are capable of having regimes that many people look in history not favorably at. Okay, so I'm not politically motivated in what I'm trying to clarify. What I'm pointing out is that the people who are trying to say that Hitler was a leftist, liberal fascist are politically motivated, and they're making false history to make these kind of statements, and they have an agenda in that, which I'm squashing. I'm not debating about whether or not it's good to be a conservative or a leftist. What I'm just saying is bad history is bad history. And why I also wanted to go over the World War II, Cold War, and War on Terror business. Many of you just didn't get it, and how can you necessarily just going this quick into the everything? But what I'm trying to get through to you is that there was a path that you can look at if you really reflected on the information in this class and you look World War II got us into the Cold War, right? And how did that happen? Hitler was defeated, so fascism's defeated. Stalin is successful, but he's also all the way into Eastern Europe. Now it's the Western world and the United States trying to push back on communism. And here we have the Cold War, and we have a nuclear arms race, right? And the US and the West build up this momentum to do everything to crush communism. And they even support Islamic radicals like in Afghanistan. And they use Saudi Arabia's Islamic political extremist views. And I say extremist compared to what has historically been mainstream Islam, by the way. And that might not be super clear to everyone. I didn't get a chance to teach the history of Islam. But just to let you know that the version of Islam that Saudi Arabia teaches comes out of basically an 18th century Sunni tradition that wasn't that popular, but the oil discovery of Saudi Arabia and its success in that way gave it the ability to propagate much of its ideas that are into destroying icons and has a very strict view about what it means to be a Muslim and not so tolerant of which historically Islam has been more tolerant than what Saudi Arabia produces. Just saying on a factual level. I'm not debating about what's real Islam. That's not what I'm debating about. Just talking about that historic case. Now, so then what we see is that 9/11 is the direct result of people who actually worked for us. At least the official narrative is Osama bin Laden was not necessarily funded by the CIA. There's not a lot of proof on that, but he was fighting on our side, if you want to put it that way, when in Afghanistan. And then there became all of this new trend of Islamic anti-Western fighters. These were the leftovers of the Frankenstein's monster of the Cold War, because the United States has been giving funding and military aid and using Pakistan for this and using Saudi Arabia, and we can go on in many, many different ways. And so what I'm trying to show is the trajectory is how we got to this situation and how the war on terror is so much more complicated than saying a war on communism. Communism is a real ideology, right? It was a real ideology with regimes, okay, that had an ideology. And even if we disagree with the methods the U.S. and the West used to combat communism, it was clear and understandable, and it was predictable. Now, when the Soviet Union fell, what is the war on terror? What are we doing? Where are we going with this? This is the current existential crisis of especially the United States. And, you know, I talk about a post-Soviet malaise or demise. It's like, think about it. Our entire institutions, everything was geared towards this one battle in the Cold War, and then it just falls apart when the Soviet Union falls apart and China switches over to a capitalist economy, and that changes the whole dynamic of what's going on in the world. So that's the links I'm trying to get you to be clear on. Okay? And then I just want to talk about then ending that I show these videos on the making and breaking of Europe and the EU and the issue of nationalism. So I want to be fair to those who are actually nationalists in Europe, that these videos don't give a lot of room for the people who are what we would call more moderate. Like, you do get the sense that everybody who has an issue about immigration and all that are all in the far right. That is something that I want to just be careful about misrepresenting that. But the fact of the matter is that the crisis is creating momentum and giving popularity and validity to the far right in a way that Europe has not been seeing for a very long time. And without me getting too biased, the Trump election did give a boost to the far right, and that's just factual from what my friends have talked about, and it's also just what the right says. And whether it's fair or not, the Trump election did have a serious effect on the political right in Europe, and that can be easily studied and understood. And again, I'm really pointing out a fact. Now, it's fair to debate whether they're just using him as an excuse, or they're misreading him, or what his relationship is to them. But the fact of the matter is, this has all been related, okay? And in a sense, you can see that what's going on in the United States over the debates about the border and refugees and undocumented workers is the same kind of thing going on throughout Europe and many other parts of the world, actually. And so it's something to take note and to see why this is such an important thing to understand. This is the critical crisis of our age, really, in terms of how we're going to move forward with this. So that's why I wanted you guys all to be exposed to this information. And I end on talking about China and the developing world. Keep in mind, China is successful. The Chinese Communist Party is a success story. And when I say success, though, this is the big debate. What do we qualify as a success? And what the woman, the African woman, points out so well in the last video, there is political freedom and there is economic freedom. And she doesn't go into much detail about this, and I don't want to overwhelm you, but Singapore, one historian described as Disneyland with the death penalty, really set the influence, which eventually China would become influenced by, which is what I would call, and one historian calls, authoritarian capitalism. And this ideology has been winning. And keep in mind that while the people in China, they've never experienced political freedom or economic freedom maybe ever, but definitely not in the century, the Chinese Communist Party, utilizing capitalism under its tight control by the Communist Party, has given unprecedented amounts of Chinese people economic freedom. And it's very clear, when I was in Cambodia and here in Thailand, there are so many Chinese tourists. And even when I was in Iceland, okay, this was something you didn't see before. And they're spending their money going out and seeing the world, and then they want to go back home. So they're not fleeing for their lives to get amnesty or trying to hide, for the most part. So China has a success story. But what about political freedom? Now, for people in the mainland who maybe never have experienced that, it's not quite clear just how important that is to people. It's not something that can be discussed in the open, so that's one thing. Now, Hong Kong. I'm heading back to Hong Kong, and it's a very worrisome state. Hong Kong was stolen by the British, as we learned in this section and this semester, and then Britain returned it back to China. And so Hong Kong has never had its own autonomy. And then Britain handed back Hong Kong already with an authoritarian government set up. I mean, the British really, I'm going to say, they created a thriving economy of Hong Kong, but they set up the people of Hong Kong to be easily brought into a dictatorial, authoritarian state because of the way that they set up the political system in Hong Kong. And so you can't just blame that on the Communist Party of China. And it's not China who stole Hong Kong back. It was, the people of Hong Kong were caught up in this drama, and so Hong Kong is a part of China. But the people of Hong Kong didn't grow up in that system, and then the Chinese government learned a lot of capitalism and utilized Hong Kong, and now is doing so well, doesn't need it as much, and is really trying to rein in control. Because what they did is they said, okay, we have two systems. Hong Kong gets to do its own thing. Now imagine if the United States received a territory back, and let's say Alaska or Hawaii was, somebody took that from us, and we get it back, but it's communist, let's say. And the United States say, okay, we're going to let them do their own thing since that's what they were doing, but they're a part of the United States. So there they can be communist, but we're not going to be communist in the rest of the state. Well, is that going to work for most nationalist leaders? Most governments are not going to tolerate in the long term having two systems under one government. So the Communist Party is taking more control of the people of Hong Kong, and the people of Hong Kong don't want it. They don't like the authoritarianism that the British left behind in their own government, and they don't like the freedoms that are being removed from them. So they already have had the economic freedom. They've had still, even though they haven't had full freedom under the Hong Kong government system, they've still been a liberal society and have had more freedom than the mainland China. So they're losing something, and they want to fight to keep what they've had. And this is a very intense drama that I did not expect to unfold while I was traveling. I spent there 2 months, and it's really emotionally affecting a lot of the people that I know there. It's a big deal. And when this presentation was given that I had you watch the last video, this did not take place yet. This was several years ago. So Hong Kong puts a glitch in this whole system. And so what are we really seeing? We're seeing internationally a battle of influence over authoritarian capitalism, and China as a leader of that. The Western world and a fight against authoritarianism and ethno-nationalism within the Western world. We are living during a time of serious drama and ideologies that can spin out of control one way or the other. So I don't want to be alarmist, but I want us to be aware. I want you to understand that this is such an important time to understand history and to pay attention to what's going on. I'm sure you love your country like I do. I hope you love the world like I do. And we have a lot to tackle. And hopefully we can make sure that we are sober-minded enough and clear-minded enough that we help support which will make, hopefully we'll be on the right side of history, and that the right side of history will win, whatever that means. And so that's all I want to say on this, really. And I hope that you also enjoy learning in this last section here.